candidate collection, right? So the investigations we did a MON2, that is the screening test of choice. We did MON2 and it came positive, 15 mm in duration. That I'll tell you later that how we interpret MON2 test, right? Then we did a chest X-ray. Then FNA of the cervical lymph node was done and it revealed caseating lymphadenitis. Also, stain for AFP came positive, right? Then we did a sputum smear which came negative, but culture of for the AFP bacilli was positive. Then this cervical lymph node was also biopsied for confirmation. And in the last, we also did an NCCT chest for confirmation. We did an NCCT chest. Why? I'll tell you later. Okay. Then this is your FNA. I'll just enlarge it for a minute. This is your FNA smear of that cervical lymph node. You can see these epithelioid cells. These are your epithelioid cells. And the background is showing caseous necrosis. This is your necrosis. These are your epithelioid cells. These are FNA smears, basically, cytology smears, right? These are your epithelioid histiocytes in a background of granular caseous necrosis. Okay. Then this was the chest X-ray that we did. And we found these are the cavities, fibrocavitatory changes in the upper zone of right lung. You can see them, right? And we also saw this left hilar lymphadenopathy. Okay. This lymphadenopathy you can see, right? And fibrocavitatory lesion. Then we also did an NCCT. Why? Because we had this cavity for confirmation of this fibrocavitatory lesion, a large cavity was there. So to confirm this lesion, we did an NCCT chest which showed a cavity with an irregular wall in the right lung. This is the pulmonary window of NCCT chest, right? Then for confirmation, we also took biopsy from this enlarged cervical lymph node. What will we get? So this is your lymph node grossly. We saw multiple areas of yellowish white, cheesy-like necrotic areas. That is caseous necrosis. And this is this enlarged lymph node. You can see. And this is cheesy white material. Okay. So this is just to tell you how we see a necrotizing granuloma or a caseous, caseating granuloma in tuberculosis. You have in the center, you'll have amorphous granular eosinophilic debris, that is caseous necrosis. The cell membranes, everything is lost. You just see amorphous granular debris, right? Then you see epithelioid cells, which are modified macrophages with abundant cytoplasm, and the nuclear membranes are not very clear. They are pale staining, slipper-shaped nuclei, right? And this is Langhans giant cell, which is a multinucleated giant cell, then surrounded by a collar of lymphocytes. Now, question for you is, name a granuloma in which this collar of lymphocytes is absent, and in which disease you see such a granuloma where you do not have characteristically this collar of lymphocytes. Okay, and the name of that granuloma. Right, so this is your characteristic TB lymphadenitis necrotizing granuloma. What did we see? So we saw this picture of tuberculous lymphadenitis and biopsy. We saw these tubercles. In TB, our granulomas are also called as tubercles, right? We are seeing these round and oval tubercles with or without central caseation. So here we are seeing caseation. We have this eosinophilic amorphous material. This is your Langhans giant cell. And you know, the older granulomas can be surrounded just by your fibroblasts and connective tissue. It's not necessary that always we'll get a complete collar of lymphocytes. Here, lymphocytes are present, but in older granulomas, they may or may not be present. In TB as well, right? So here you can see these lymphocytes, Langhans giant cell, your granulomas with the caseous necrosis, epithelioid cells, And your necrosis is obviously structureless, homogeneous, pink in color, right? This is a high power view of the same patient showing your Langhans giant cell. This characteristic arrangement of nuclei is seen slipper shaped. This is called as Langhans giant cell. This arrangement in the periphery, right? And you have these epithelioid cells. You can see beautiful epithelioid cells are there, and your Langhans giant cell and your peripheral rim of lymphocytes. This is the high power view of the same granuloma. So this is just a part of the granuloma that you are seeing, right? Understood? Now we'll study in detail about the screening and diagnostic tests that we do in tuberculosis. So we did want to, right? And we got 15 mm induration. What does that mean? We'll study about it, all of that, right? So the primary screening method for tuberculosis infection, active or latent, is the Montu tuberculin skin test with purified protein derivative. Okay, PPD, purified protein derivative, is injected 0.1 ml intradermally. Okay, and an in vitro blood test based on interferon gamma release assay with antigen specific for Mycobacterium tuberculosis can also be used. This is an alternative test. Like instead of Montu, we can do this test also to screen for latent TB infection. So the basic tests that we do in patients with suspected TB is we'll do first we'll do screening test, then we'll do AFP, smear, and culture using sputum obtained from the patient. Then we'll do HIV serology in this patient. This is very important, HIV serology, because HIV and TB can coexist. And in HIV patients, TB is the most common infectious disease, right? In all patients with TB and unknown HIV status. So that has to be done. Then stains for AFB is quick but require a very high organism load. About 10,000 bacilli per ml should be there for positivity. So that is why stain for AFB is not a very sensitive test. Also, it's not specific, right? This test is more useful in patients with pulmonary disease. Then other diagnostic testing may need to be considered as a delay in diagnosis can increase patient mortality. Traditional mycobacterial culture, now you can do stain, you can do culture also, but culture is the gold standard test, but it requires weeks for growth and identification. The culture, the bacteria, they require weeks to grow, right? So newer technologies allow identification within 24 hours. We'll see the newer technologies later. These are the conventional things that we do, but still your culture is gold standard for tuberculosis. Then you obtain a chest radiograph to evaluate for possible associated pulmonary findings, like we saw in our chest radiograph, the fibrocavitatory lesion, characteristic hilar lymphadenopathy. That's the characteristic picture. If chest radiography findings suggest TB and the sputum smear is positive for AFP, then you start treatment for tuberculosis, right? That is what our National Tuberculosis Elimination Program, our Indian program, that's what it says. Then a computed tomography scan of the chest may help to better define abnormalities in patients with vague findings on chest radiograph. So a CT can also be done to better define the abnormalities, like in our case we did, right? So details of our tuberculin skin test, Montu test, that's the primary screening method for TB infection, active or latent. It's the Montu tuberculin skin test done with purified protein derivative. Tuberculin sensitivity develops 2 to 10 weeks after infection and usually it's lifelong. Tuberculin skin testing is based on the fact that TB infection induces strong cell-mediated immune response that results in a measurable delayed type hypersensitivity reaction, as ma'am also taught in the lecture. Delayed type hypersensitivity reaction hoga to intradermal inoculation of tuberculin purified protein derivative, right? And now, as in our patient, we had 15 mm in duration, right? So we have population-based criteria for to say that this patient's Montu test is positive. So 5 mm cutoff will be used. That That means like 5 mm is positive, 5 mm or more is positive for patients who are HIV positive, have abnormal chest radiographic findings, have significant immunosuppression, or have had recent contact with persons with active tuberculosis. For them, our cutoff is 5 mm for positivity. Then 10 mm cutoff or more is for patients who are intravenous drug users, residents of nursing homes, prisoners, impoverished persons, or members of minority groups. Then your 15 mm or more cutoff is for patients who are young and in good health, like children. Okay, who are immunocompetent, who have no exposure. Then the PPD test involves an intradermal injection. This we have read 0.1 ml intradermal injection, preferably with a 26, 27 or 30 gauge needle. And the results should be read between 48 and 72 hours after administration. So one disadvantage is the patient will have to come to the doctor again after 2 to 3 days to get checked for the induration. So this is one disadvantage. In immunologically intact individuals, induration of less than 5 mm constitutes a negative result. Okay. So now instead of MON2, we have another test called interferon gamma release assay. This is an in vitro blood test based on interferon gamma release assay with antigen specific for MTB to detect antibodies. It can also be used to screen for latent TB infection. Okay, and offers certain advantages over tuberculin skin testing. The main advantage is that the patient will not have to come again. It's faster. So the two currently available tests that we use are QuantiFERON TB Golden Tube, which is an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay-based test, and T-Spot TB, which is a ELISpot assay. Okay, you just have to remember the names: QuantiFERON TB Golden Tube and T-Spot TB. Okay. Then our conventional sputum smear that we do. Patients suspected of having TB should submit sputum for AFB smear and culture. Sputum should be collected in the early morning on 3 consecutive days. In hospitalized patients, sputum may be collected every 8 hours. Early morning gastric aspirate may also produce a good specimen, especially in children. Then in patients without spontaneous sputum production, sputum induction with hypertonic saline should be attempted. Okay. Then fiber optic bronchoscopy with bronchoalveolar lavage and perhaps transbronchial biopsy can be used if other attempts at obtaining sputum specimens are unsuccessful. Okay, mostly we try spontaneous sputum production and induction with hypertonic saline. Okay, then ZN staining is a simple, ZN staining will do. Another stain that we can use is, that's the question for you. Apart from ZN, another stain, acid fast stain that we can use. Right. ZN staining of sputum is a simple 5-step process that takes approximately 10 minutes to accomplish. While highly specific for mycobacteria, however, this stain is relatively insensitive. And detection, as I told you earlier, requires at least 10,000 bacilli per ml. But most clinical labs currently use a more sensitive auramine rhodamine fluorescence stain these days. Okay, a fluorescence stain called auramine O. This is being used in most clinical laboratories, especially at the private labs these days. So TB detection following negative smear. In case the smear is negative, then the absence of a positive smear result does not exclude active TB infection, as we studied earlier, that it's not very sensitive, right? Approximately 35% culture positive specimens are associated with a negative smear result. Okay. In an article, it was found that an MTB specific ELISpot assay can be used to differentiate TB cases with negative sputum smears from latent TB infection. In a prospective study of 347 patients suspected of having active TB who were unable to produce sputum or who had AFB negative sputum smears, ELISpot testing of bronchoalveolar lavage fluid displayed a sensitivity and specificity of 91% and 80% respectively. So this assay, this new technique is better. But this is still very new, but is found to be more sensitive and specific. So the question that I had asked you, another stain for sputum smear is Apart from Zn carbol fusion stain, you can use Kinyun's carbol fusion stain also. So these are the special stains for MTB. So why, we say that our Mycobacterium tuberculosis, they are acid-fast bacilli. Why they are called acid-fast? Why? Because MTB is non-motile rod shape characterized and identified by a property known as acid-fast. Why? Because it has basically mycolic acid in its wall. This is responsible for the acid fastness. Okay. So identified by a property known as acid fast, meaning that once absorbed, the dye used to stain the bacilli should not be removed when incubated in an acid rinse. The preferred method of identification is an AFB stain, otherwise called as acid fast bacteria stain. This we have covered. So mycolic acid is a mechanism responsible for this acid fast property. The cell wall of the bacteria produces this waxy substance called mycolic acid, which links with substances within the cell wall of the bacteria, making them resistant to decolorization. So the color won't go. The most common choices of AFB stains are Kinyun's or Zn carbol fusion, and the solutions, procedures, and results are similar for both, as we have discussed. So this is the picture. You can see these pink bacilli. This is hyper, pink elongated, right? You can see them. These are your, you can enlarge it a bit. Wait. You can see these are your bacilli, right? So culture, as I told you, is the gold standard for tuberculosis. Though it takes a longer time, but still it's the gold standard. If your smear comes negative, we always send culture for AFP. It is the most specific test and allows direct identification and determination of susceptibility of the positive organism. Access to the organisms, however, may require lymph node or sputum analysis, bronchoalveolar lavage, or aspirate of cavity fluid or bone marrow. In addition, obtaining the test results is slow and they have a very low positivity only in some forms of disease. Okay. The main disadvantage is that a lot of time for results, 3 to 8 weeks to show results, right? And the routine culture used is a non-selective egg medium, LJ medium, Lowenstein Jensen, or another medium is Middlebrook 7H10. And this often requires more than 3 to 4 weeks because of the 22-hour doubling time of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So you should know the doubling time is 22 hours. Radiometric broth culture, that is BACTAC radiometric system, was found to significantly reduce this time for mycobacterial recovery. So this is a new method that can be used, and this reduces the time to about 1 to 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days, right? So this is better than our conventional LJ media and Middlebrook medium. So now we can use BACTAC. So some ancillary tests for tuberculosis, that is some newer tests, other tests that we can use in diagnosis, we can use. So one is your SPECT is single photon emission computed tomography. This is a type of CT scan, technetium labeled scan there, and this is for solitary pulmonary nodules and yields a high predictive value for distinguishing TB from malignancy. So it's very specific and especially useful for distinguishing TB from malignancy. And it has the potential to serve as a low-cost alternative when PET scanning is not available. Especially if you are suspecting malignancy, then you should do SPECT. Then another test you must have heard about CBNAT. CBNAT is cartridge-based nucleic acid amplification test. Basically, NAT, nucleic acid amplification test. This is also a very good test and is mentioned in our national TB elimination program as well. So here the DNA probe specific for mycobacterial ribosomal RNA identifies species of clinically significant isolates after recovery. And as you know, your PCR, in that also RT-PCR is a very sensitive and a very specific technique that can be used for detection of M. tuberculosis, especially in cases where you're suspecting it, but your tests are coming negative. In case of high suspicion, it's very sensitive and specific again, but expensive. PCR amplification techniques can also be used to detect MTB specific DNA sequences, and thus small numbers can be detected in clinical specimens. Even small numbers as you know, the quality of PCR, it amplifies. Even small number of bacilli, small number of antigens, it will amplify and show the results. Then another thing is your drug susceptibility testing. Why it's important? Because of the emergence of MDR-TB, as you know. So positive cultures should be followed by drug susceptibility testing. Symptoms and radiographic findings differentiate MDR-TB from fully susceptible TB. We suspect the patient has a history of previous treatment, was born in or lived in a country with high prevalence of MDR-TB, has a known exposure to an MDR-TB case, or is clinically progressing despite standard TB therapy. So susceptibility testing should be repeated if cultures remain positive even after 2 months, even when initial susceptibilities have not revealed any resistance. For this, we can do BACTEC 460. These are tests for drug susceptibility. BACTEC 460, ligase chain reaction, Lucifer reporter assays. This is, you can just remember BACTEC 460. And for rifampicin, we have a new test for testing drug resistance known as fast flat TB drift. Okay, you should just remember BACTEC 460. That's it. Okay. Then now we'll come on to the microscopy, your gross and microscopic findings in pulmonary tuberculosis. Okay. So as we have discussed in the lecture as well, primary tuberculosis, it occurs in countries where consumption of infected milk has been eliminated, primary TB almost always begins in the lungs, right? Typically, the inhaled bacilli implant in the distal air spaces of the lower part of upper or upper part of lower lobe. Now, the question for you is why it has this propensity of affecting the lower part of upper lobe or the upper part of lower lobe. Why this characteristic location and close to the pleura? So this is the question for you. So as sensitization develops, a 1 to 1.5 centimeter area of gray-white inflammation with consolidation emerges, as ma'am had taught, which is called as Ghone's focus. So your parenchymal focus is your Ghone's focus. In most cases, the center of this focus will undergo caseous necrosis, and tubercle bacilli, either free or within phagocytes, drain to the regional nodes, which also often caseate. This combination of this parenchymal lung lesion called Ghone's focus with your nodal involvement is referred to as Ghone's complex. And if this Ghone's complex undergoes calcification and fibrosis, it's called as Ranke's complex, right? And the question for you is, what is Simon's focus now? So that's the question for you. During the first few weeks, there's also lymphatic and hematogenous dissemination to other parts of the body. In approximately 95% cases, development of cell-mediated immunity controls the infection, as you know. In 95% cases, on chest X-ray, you just get an incidental solitary small nodule. You have no symptoms. Hence, the Ghone's complex will undergo fibrosis followed by radiologically detectable calcification, as I told you just now. And despite seeding of other organs, no lesions will develop. Okay. And on microscopy, what will you see? Sites of active involvement. They are marked by characteristic granulomatous inflammatory reaction that forms both caseating and non-caseating tubercles. That is the granulomas. Individual tubercles are microscopic. It is only when multiple granulomas coalesce that they become macroscopically visible, right? And the granulomas are enclosed within a fibroblastic rim of lymphocytes. So I'd ask you a question: granuloma in which this fibroblastic rim of lymphocytes is absent. What is the name of that granuloma? And the characteristic example of the disease in which you have this granuloma. So that's the question for you. And also another question: examples of diseases which show non-caseating granulomas. Multi-mutated giant cells are present in TB in these granulomas, and immunocompromised people do not form the characteristic granulomas, and their macrophages contain many bacilli. So immunocompromised people, in them you will have ill-formed granulomas. Okay, you won't have the characteristic this central necrosis by lymphocytes. So this is a beautiful picture showing this parenchymal focus. This is your Ghone's focus, and this is your hilar lymph node. Okay, this is your Ghone's focus, the subpleural region. And together with this hilar lymph node, this is called your Ghone's complex, right? This is your affected lymph node, hilar lymph nodes. This is your Ghone's focus, right? Then on microscopy, microscopy, we are seeing this. This is an early granuloma. In early granuloma, you see apoptotic bodies. That is, these are the pycnotic nuclei of the epithelioid cells. Okay. Now, at this stage, you're not seeing well-formed epithelioid cells. Here, you can see epithelioid cells, some cells, but you in early granuloma, you see these pycnotic nuclei. Then you have these beautiful multinucleated giant cells, Langhans giant cell, okay, surrounded by a cup of lymphocytes. Okay, so this is granuloma with central early necrosis. Okay, mostly you get this in the center. You get, as I had shown you earlier, you get this amorphous granular debris from the caseous necrosis and beautiful epithelioid cells. Here also you're getting, but prominently you have these pycnotic nuclei. So here now we can see this Langhans giant cell, this central necrosis, connective tissue surrounded by lymphocytes. This cup of lymphocytes is there. Okay, and you have your giant cell as well. Okay, granulomas are composed of transformed macrophages called epithelioid cells. So granulomas are basically a collection of epithelioid cells with or without central necrosis. It's not necessary that always you'll get a central necrosis. Okay, your Robin says this, right? Along with lymphocytes, occasional polymorphs, plasma cells, and fibroblasts. So this is a high par view of your tubercular granuloma showing this central caseous necrosis, beautiful, and surrounded by inflammatory component. With your epithelioid cells, you can see these beautiful epithelioid cells, elongated cells. You have your lymphocytes and some fibroblasts. Okay. Basically, you have your lymphocytes, fibroblasts, and epithelioid cells. You can see this caseous necrosis here. Now, secondary TB, this is the form of TB that will develop in a previously sensitized host, and mostly it will be more aggressive as compared to your primary tuberculosis. Here, the findings are more aggressive. The initial lesion is usually a small focus of consolidation, less than 2 centimeters in diameter, within 1 to 2 centimeters of the apical crura. These foci are sharply circumscribed, firm, and gray-white to yellow in color and have variable degrees of central caseation and peripheral fibrosis. In immunocompetent individuals, the initial parenchymal focus undergoes progressive fibrous encapsulation, leaving only fibrocalcific scars, right? Histologically, what you'll see the active lesions show characteristic coalescent tubercles with central caseation. Again, tubercle bacilli can often be identified with acid-fast stains in early exudative and caseous phases of granuloma formation, but are usually too few to be found in the late fibrocalcific stages. In secondary TB, there's there's always a higher risk that the patient will have fibrocavitary lesions. So, if it's in the advanced stage, you may or may not find granulomas. If fibrosis has occurred, calcification has occurred, you may or may not find granulomas. Then, localized apical secondary pulmonary tuberculosis may heal with fibrosis either spontaneously after therapy, or the disease may progress and extend along several different pathways. You can even have disseminated tuberculosis, miliary pulmonary disease that we'll discuss later, right? Then, so the complications of pulmonary TB. If the treatment is inadequate or the host defenses are impaired, the infection may spread via airways, lymphatic channels, or vascular system. So, the most common way of spread is hematogenous spread. You have to remember that. Okay, in miliary disease, you have to remember that the most common way of spread is hematogenous. It occurs when organisms drain through lymphatics, enter the venous blood, and circulate back to lungs. Okay. Individual lesions are either microscopic or small. Visible 2 millimeter foci of yellow-white consolidations are scattered throughout the lung parenchyma. They are called miliary because they are millet seeds. They resemble these yellow-white millet seeds. Okay, as ma'am showed in a beautiful picture as well. Sorry. Miliary lesions may expand and coalesce, resulting in consolidation of large regions of the lung, or even whole lobes of the lung can be affected. In your Robbins, a beautiful picture of miliary TB of the spleen is given. Just check that picture. It's a very nice picture. With progressive pulmonary tuberculosis, the pleural cavity is invariably involved and serious pleural effusions, tuberculous empyema, or obliterative fibrous pleuritis may develop. So these are your sequelae that will eventually develop if the disease is left untreated or it progresses further. So progressive primary tuberculosis that occurs in immunosuppressed individuals spreads in a similar manner or in immunosuppressed individuals. Then endobronchial, endotracheal, and laryngeal TB can also develop by spread through lymphatic channels or from expectorated infectious material. Okay. The mucosal lining may be studded with minute granulomatous lesions that may only be apparent microscopically. Right? Then systemic miliary tuberculosis occurs when bacteria disseminate through the systemic arterial system. Okay, that's what I told you earlier, right? Or you can also call this as disseminated TB. Miliary tuberculosis is most prominent in the liver, bone marrow, spleen, adrenals, meninges, that is your CNS, kidneys, fallopian tubes, and epididymis, but can involve any organ. You have to remember that TB can involve any organ of our body. So this is a picture of secondary TB showing these large fibrocavitatory lesions, right? Extensive necrosis with basically you have this cavitation. Here you can see miliary TB. On that section you see those millet seeds better. Here they're just showing you because as I told you, miliary TB occurs when TB lung lesions erode the vasculature, that is erode pulmonary veins, or when extrapulmonary TB lesions erode systemic veins. So here you can see these hemorrhagic areas, these red areas, you can see these hemorrhagic areas, that's what they are showing here, right? And you can see these gray-white foci of necrosis as well, Basically here they're trying to show you the hemorrhagic areas because they erode pulmonary veins or system. This results in hematogenous dissemination of the bacilli, producing myriads of 1 to 2 millimeter lesions throughout the body in susceptible hosts. And miliary spread limited to lungs can occur following erosion of pulmonary artery lung lesions. Okay. Then other complications, you can have progressive pulmonary tuberculosis. It may ensue in older adults and especially in immunosuppressed people. That is, example, people living with HIV/AIDS. Their lesion expands into adjacent lung and eventually erodes into bronchi and vessels. This evacuates the caseous center, creating a ragged, irregular cavity that is poorly walled off by fibrous tissue. Erosion of blood vessels results in hemolysis. With adequate treatment, the process may be arrested, although healing by fibrosis often distorts the pulmonary architecture. The cavities, now free of inflammation, may persist or become fibrotic, right? Isolated tuberculosis, that is, it may appear in any of the, that is, this is extrapulmonary tuberculosis. It may appear in any of the organs or tissues seeded hematogenously and may be the presenting manifestation. It can be through your primary tuberculosis or it can be the presenting manifestation. For example, your CNS TB, that is tuberculous meningitis, renal TB, hepatic TB, your adrenals, which was in TB adrenals, which is formerly an important cause of Addison's. Then your osteomyelitis, TB salpingitis, which is one of the leading causes of secondary infertility in India. TB salpingitis. Okay, this is important. When the vertebrae are affected, the disease is referred to as Pott's disease. You know Pott's spine. Paraspinal fold abscesses in these patients may track along tissue planes and present as an abdominal or pelvic mass as well. Okay. Now, something about patients with HIV/AIDS. Individuals who are infected with HIV are at an increased risk for TB beginning within the first year of HIV infection. All patients who are diagnosed with active TB, as we discussed earlier, and who are not known to be HIV positive, should be considered for HIV testing. HIV serology should be done in all patients of active tuberculosis. The initiation of antiretroviral therapy decreases the risk of developing TB in these patients. although the TB risk remains higher in the first 3 months of ART, the highest risk is in patients with following factors. In HIV patients, the highest risk is in these patients for TB. That is, the patients with HIV who have a baseline CD4 count of less than 200. That is, their T cells are very much reduced, right? So, very high amount of immunosuppression. Then, higher baseline HIV-1 RNA level. That is, the viral load is very high. Okay. Then your patients who are IV drug abusers, male gender. So these are the risk factors for your HIV/AIDS patients. They have an increased risk for tuberculosis. Okay. In a study from Durban, South Africa, nearly 20% patients who started antiretroviral therapy had undiagnosed culture-positive pulmonary tuberculosis. Neither cough nor acid-fast bacillus smear was sufficiently sensitive for screening. So here, TB sputum cultures should be attempted before ART initiation in areas where there is higher prevalence of TB. As I told you, culture is the gold standard, right? Patients with TB must be tested for HIV, and patients with HIV need periodic evaluation for TB. So it's on both sides. Like patients with TB have to be tested for HIV, and HIV patients need testing for TB with tuberculin skin testing and or chest radiography. Patients with HIV and a positive tuberculin skin test result develop active TB at the rate of 3 to 60% per year. Okay, so that's a very comparatively high count. Patients with TB and HIV are more likely to have disseminated disease. Okay, why disseminated? Because they are highly immunosuppressed. Their cell-mediated immunity and less likely to have upper lobe infiltrates or classic cavitatory pulmonary disease. So they have high grade, disseminated tuberculosis. Patients with a CD4 count of less than 200 may even have mediastinal adenopathy with infiltrates. So mediastinal lymphadenopathy can also be there, especially in HIV positive patients. Now, something about autopsy findings in disseminated TB. So first we'll discuss disseminated TB, then I'll show you your autopsy findings. Then disseminated TB is defined as having 2 or more non-contiguous sites resulting from lymphohematogenous dissemination of Mycobacterium tuberculosis, right? Extrapulmonary involvement occurs in 1/5 of all TB cases, and it may occur in the absence of histological and radiological evidence of pulmonary infection. So, examples for disseminated TB, you can have hepatic tuberculosis, particularly in the absence of miliary tuberculosis. It's rare and can occur as a primary case or due to reactivation of an old tubercular focus. You can have renal TB, you can have pericardial involvement, you can have TB salpingitis, that is genitourinary TB. Okay. You can have, it can infect the CNS as ma'am taught, TB, meningitis, ventriculitis, right? Diagnosis is often difficult as clinical manifestations are non-specific and because it can mimic several other disorders. Clinically, hepatic TB can present as fever of unknown origin, abdominal pain, and jaundice. So the symptoms are not specific, they're vague, which if not timely diagnosed and properly managed, can culminate in fulminant hepatic failure that may prove fatal. Which we saw hepatic tuberculosis in our case. Involvement in tuberculosis may result in acute pericarditis. In the heart, TB has the highest propensity to affect the pericardium, followed by myocardium, and in the last aorta. So it affects mostly the pericardium and causes pericarditis. Okay. And then it can cause chronic pericardial effusion, cardiac tamponade, or pericardial constriction. The disease has insidious onset and patients may present with fever and can manifest vague precordial pain or cardiomegaly on a chest radiograph. So here in our patient, we had this, yeah, you can see these mononuclear infiltrates. You can see epithelioid cells. As I told you, necrosis may or may not be there. So Here you have a collection of epithelioid cells. So this is an ill-shaped granuloma basically, along with mononuclear cell infiltrates. Here also you have mononuclear cell infiltrates in a case of hepatic tuberculosis. Then this patient also showed renal TB, so extensive renal TB. The post-mortem specimen demonstrates this caseation in the renal cortices. This white cheesy caseation involved the whole of the extensive involvement of the cortices uh, affected by TB, and following primary pulmonary infection, mycobacteria spread to the renal tract. As I told you, they spread hematogenously, and caseating granulomas can form, which are usually bilateral in both kidneys and cortical. They can also erode into the pelvic calyceal system, resulting in disease spread to the rest of the renal tract also. Okay. And grossly, it's called as, you'll tell me a famous name in renal TB, especially in radiographically, calcified non-functioning kidney, TB kidney. What is it called as? Okay. So here you can see in this patient we had caseous necrosis affecting mainly the glomeruli as well as the tubules. Architecture is completely lost. You can see these pink amorphous structureless debris. This is caseous necrosis in this case of renal tuberculosis, and you also have some infiltrates. And in this patient, his lung was like this, bilateral apical scarring. So scarring is the final stage, that is fibrocavitatory scarring, which we read now. It can occur in disseminated progressive tuberculosis. So in this patient, in his post-mortem lung specimen, we saw this bilateral apical scarring because of fibrosis and cavity formation. Ultimately, there was scarring, basically due to fibrosis. Okay, lung fibrosis. Thank you. So, yeah, putti kidney, you are right, Sahiba. Okay. Right. Crohn's disease, sarcoidosis, leprosy, they show non-caseating granulomas. Even Hodgkin's can show non-caseating granulomas. Very good. And the cat scratch what's the name of the granulomas that we see? Can anyone tell me? Yeah, naked granuloma. Very good, Pooja. Yeah, sarcoidosis. What is Simon's focus? Yeah, it's found in secondary tuberculosis. Basically, Simon's focus is that a focus from somewhere else, that is from extrapulmonary TB, a focus has come and it has lodged in the apex of the lung, a parenchymal focus. So it's found in secondary TB. Very good. Right. Basically, the ventilation perfusion ratio is low. And so VQ is low, that is the perfusion is high, right? That's why the TB affects the junction of the upper and lower lobe, basically the lower part of upper lobe and upper part of lower lobe, because there's high perfusion in those areas. Very good. Mycolic acid. I didn't ask this question. Mycolic acid. Yeah, Kinmune carbol fusion. Very good. This was Sheetal. Very good, Sheetal. Okay. Naked granulomas are seen in sarcoidosis. Very good. That's what I was asking you, right? Stellate granuloma in cat scratch disease. Very good, Shashwat. Okay, guys. Thank